How the 12 Apostles of Jesus Christ died. Have you ever wondered what became of the 12 men who walked with Jesus, who witnessed his miracles, heard his teachings, and watched him conquer death? We know their names, we know their stories in Scripture, but the end of their earthly journeys is a testimony few truly understand. The way each apostle faced death reveals not only the cost of following Christ, but the depth of their unwavering faith. These men were ordinary in their beginnings, fishermen, tax collectors, zealots, yet they became extraordinary through the power of Jesus Christ. Their deaths were not just ends to their earthly lives, they were declarations of devotion, courage, and the transformative power of God's presence in their hearts. From Peter, who accepted crucifixion upside down because he felt unworthy to die as Jesus did, to John, the beloved disciple who survived exile to proclaim the visions of Revelation, each apostle met the end of their earthly journey in a way that reflected their unique relationship with Jesus. Some were martyred for the gospel, pierced, beaten, or flayed. Others endured persecution, exile, or the betrayal of those around them. Even Judas Iscariot, whose life ended in despair after betraying the Messiah, serves as a sobering lesson about choice, consequences, and the need for repentance. Beloved, understanding how these 12 men died is more than a historical curiosity. It is an invitation to reflect on our own faith. Their courage challenges us, their obedience inspires us, and their unwavering devotion calls us to examine how deeply we are willing to follow Christ, even when it costs us everything. Today we will journey through the final moments of the 12 apostles, not to glorify death, but to illuminate the power of a life surrendered fully to Jesus. Their sacrifices are a roadmap of faith, a mirror of courage, and a call to live with unwavering devotion, knowing that the reward of faithfulness far exceeds the trials of this world. Part 1. Peter and Andrew, the first called, the first tested. Peter was a man of impulsive faith and deep devotion. From the moment Jesus called him from his nets, Peter's life became intertwined with the mission of Christ. He walked on water, confessed Jesus as the Messiah, and yet faltered when fear overcame him. But it was in his later years that Peter's faith was tested to its fullest. Tradition tells us that he was crucified in Rome, but not in the ordinary way. He requested to be hung upside down, feeling unworthy to die in the same manner as his Lord. Imagine the courage it took to face such a death, knowing the suffering that awaited him, yet embracing it as an act of worship, an acknowledgement of his devotion to Jesus above all else. Peter's death is a testament to a life surrendered fully to God, showing us that faith often requires courage, humility, and total obedience, even to the point of giving up one's own life. Peter's brother Andrew was also among the first called. He may not have had Peter's fiery personality, but his devotion was no less steadfast. Tradition holds that Andrew was crucified on an X-shaped cross, now known as St. Andrew's Cross, in Greece. He preached courageously, even in the face of death, refusing to renounce Christ. His willingness to embrace a painful and humiliating death, rather than deny his Lord, teaches us about the cost of discipleship and the strength that comes from trusting Jesus completely. Andrew's death reminds us that faithfulness is not measured by comfort or recognition, but by steadfast loyalty and unwavering commitment, no matter the personal cost. Both Peter and Andrew show us the profound power of faith that transcends fear. They were ordinary men who became extraordinary because they were willing to follow Jesus without compromise. Their deaths were not tragedies in God's eyes. They were the crowning testimony of lives that had been transformed by Christ. Every act of courage, every word of obedience, and every step taken in faith led them to a moment that would inspire countless generations. As we reflect on their endings, we are reminded that faith is not merely a belief, but a lived reality, one that sometimes requires sacrifice, endurance, and an unwavering gaze toward eternity. Peter and Andrew also teach us about the legacy of leadership and witness. Peter, as a rock upon which the church was built, faced challenges, persecution, and even denial in his life, yet he emerged as a beacon of hope and faith for the early believers. Andrew, though often in the shadow of his brother, exemplified quiet strength and perseverance. Their lives and deaths encourage us to examine our own devotion. Are we willing to stand firm in faith when the world pressures us to compromise? Are we willing to live boldly for Christ, even if it means facing trials that seem insurmountable? Their stories remind us that God honors faithfulness, rewards courage, and transforms ordinary lives into enduring legacies. Beloved, the example of Peter and Andrew is not just about their martyrdom. It is about the lives they lived in alignment with Jesus, the courage they displayed in moments of fear, and the devotion that carried them through suffering. Their stories challenge us to rise above complacency, to live faithfully in a world that often opposes God's truth, and to embrace the path of discipleship fully, knowing that God sees our faithfulness and rewards it beyond measure. Part 2. James the Greater and John, sons of thunder and faithfulness. James, known as James the Greater, was a man of zeal and passion, one of the inner circle of Jesus' apostles. He witnessed the Transfiguration, walked on the shores of Galilee, and boldly proclaimed the message of Christ. Yet his earthly life ended abruptly when he became the first apostle to be martyred. Executed by the sword under the orders of King Herod, James's death was swift but impactful. It served as a stark reminder to the early church that following Jesus could demand the ultimate sacrifice. James' courage in facing death demonstrates that the call to discipleship is not without cost, and that faith often requires unwavering boldness, even when the stakes are life itself. John, his brother, offers a contrasting yet equally powerful example. Known as the beloved disciple, John experienced the rapture of Christ in ways few others did. He was present at the cross, stood with Mary as Jesus breathed his last, and received the task of caring for her after the crucifixion. Unlike James, John did not meet a violent end immediately. Instead, he was exiled to the island of Patmos, where he received the visions that became the book of Revelation. John's longevity allowed him to witness the unfolding of God's plan, and his endurance in exile reflects the power of perseverance and faithfulness under sustained trials. The lives and deaths of James and John illustrate the spectrum of discipleship, from immediate martyrdom to lifelong endurance. James's story challenges us to be bold, to stand firmly for Christ even when facing certain death, and to embrace courage as a reflection of unwavering faith. John's life reminds us that faithfulness is also measured in patience, endurance, and steadfast obedience over time. Both approaches reveal the same truth. Following Jesus may demand sacrifice, but the reward is eternal, and the testimony of faith inspires countless generations. Their examples also highlight the importance of witness. James's death set a precedent for the apostles and the early church, demonstrating that truth and courage go hand in hand. John's writings and perseverance became a beacon of hope and a guide for the faithful, showing that endurance in faith leaves a legacy as powerful as a martyr's final stand. Together, they represent the dual call of discipleship, to be bold in action and faithful in perseverance, trusting that God's plan surpasses our understanding and that every act of devotion carries eternal significance. Beloved, James and John challenge us to consider our own faithfulness. Are we willing to face immediate trials with courage, like James, or to endure long periods of difficulty and remain steadfast, like John? Their lives and deaths teach us that discipleship requires both strength and patience, boldness and endurance. Each moment of faithfulness, whether brief and intense or long and sustained, reflects the transformative power of Christ in our lives and leaves a lasting testimony for those who follow. The courage of James and the endurance of John inspire us to live fully committed to Jesus, knowing that our actions, words, and faithfulness matter. They remind us that following Christ is not about comfort or safety. It is about surrender, devotion, and the willingness to embrace whatever path God has prepared for us. Their stories encourage us to stand firm, to persevere, and to trust that God honors those who remain faithful, regardless of the challenges or trials they face. In contemplating the deaths and legacies of James and John, we are invited to examine our own commitment to Christ. Their lives illustrate that faithfulness is expressed in different ways, but the underlying truth is the same. Unwavering devotion to Jesus, courage in the face of fear, and endurance through trials yield a testimony that transcends time. Beloved, may their examples inspire us to walk boldly and faithfully in our own journeys of discipleship. Part 3. Philip, Bartholomew, and Thomas, Witnesses to the Ends. Philip was a man of humility and steady faith. Though not as prominent as Peter or John, he faithfully followed Jesus and shared the gospel with sincerity and dedication. Tradition tells us that Philip was crucified in Hierapolis. His death was not merely an end to a life, it was the culmination of a life committed fully to Christ's mission. Philip's willingness to endure suffering and face a painful death teaches us that faithfulness is measured not by fame or recognition, but by steadfast devotion to God's calling. His example reminds us that obedience, even in obscurity, carries eternal significance, and that every act of service and witness contributes to God's larger plan. Bartholomew, also known as Nathanael, was a man of integrity and courage. Tradition holds that he was martyred in Armenia, flayed alive for his unwavering faith in Jesus. His suffering was extreme, yet his testimony remains powerful through the ages. Bartholomew's death challenges us to consider the depth of our own commitment. Are we willing to endure discomfort, persecution, or even ridicule for the sake of Christ? His life and death reveal that true discipleship demands courage, trust in God's presence, and the understanding that earthly pain is temporary compared to the eternal reward awaiting the faithful. Thomas, often remembered for his doubt, became a remarkable witness to the world. After seeing the risen Christ, Thomas traveled far to proclaim the gospel, reaching as far as India. Tradition suggests that he was pierced by a spear for his faith. Thomas's journey illustrates that even those who struggle with doubt can become powerful instruments of God when they fully surrender to his calling. His life reminds us that perseverance, courage, and the willingness to go wherever God leads are essential components of discipleship. Each apostle's death underscores a truth. The measure of faith is seen not only in belief, but in the courage to proclaim and live it, regardless of the cost. Together, Philip, Bartholomew, and Thomas exemplify the courage of those called to spread the gospel to the ends of the earth. Their stories challenge us to embrace God's call fully, to step beyond fear, and to serve with unwavering commitment. Their martyrdoms and missions reflect a faith that is active, resilient, and willing to sacrifice everything for the sake of Christ. For the modern believer, these apostles are models of boldness, showing that faith is not passive but transformative, and that true discipleship often requires risk, endurance, and total trust in Jesus. Part 4. Matthew, James the Less, Thaddaeus, and Simon the Zealot. Ordinary men, extraordinary faith. Matthew, the tax collector turned apostle, exemplifies transformation through Christ. Known for writing the Gospel of Matthew, he dedicated his life to sharing the story and teachings of Jesus. Tradition suggests he was martyred, possibly by stabbing or sword. His death reflects a life that shifted from self-interest to complete devotion, illustrating that no background or past mistake disqualifies a person from God's mission. Matthew's story teaches us that obedience to God often requires leaving behind comfort, security, and certainty to embrace a life of service and, if necessary, suffering. James the Less, often overlooked in the narratives, demonstrated steadfastness in humility. Tradition indicates he may have been clubbed to death in Jerusalem. His life reminds us that faithfulness is not always accompanied by recognition or renown. Sometimes God calls his children to serve quietly, faithfully, and persistently, leaving a legacy of devotion that speaks louder than fame or visibility. His example challenges us to embrace our own calling, however obscure, with unwavering loyalty to Christ. Thaddaeus, also known as Jude, was martyred, possibly in Persia. His life exemplified obedience and humility, showing that courage is not always loud, but often steadfast and persistent. Even when facing danger and the threat of death, Thaddaeus remained committed to spreading the gospel. His story teaches that faithfulness requires perseverance, even in the face of uncertainty, isolation, or risk. Simon the Zealot, who once carried a passion for political change, redirected his zeal toward God's kingdom. Tradition suggests he was crucified or sawed in half for his unwavering faith. Simon's transformation from a man motivated by earthly zeal to one consumed by spiritual devotion demonstrates the power of God's calling to redirect energy and passion toward eternal purposes. His story encourages believers to channel their hearts fully toward God, using their gifts, passion, and zeal to honor Christ. These four apostles, though ordinary men in their beginnings, became extraordinary through their devotion to Jesus. Their deaths were a reflection of lives fully surrendered, showing that faithfulness often requires courage, endurance, and humility. Matthew, James the Less, Thaddaeus, and Simon the Zealot challenge us to embrace our calling with courage, serve faithfully regardless of recognition, and remain steadfast in the face of trials. Their lives demonstrate that discipleship is not measured by comfort or acclaim, but by unwavering commitment, courageous obedience, and a willingness to face persecution for the sake of Christ. Beloved, the stories of these apostles remind us that following Jesus is not a path of ease, but one of devotion, sacrifice, and courage. Each life, each death, each act of obedience speaks to the transformative power of Christ. They teach us that ordinary men and women, when fully surrendered to God, can leave legacies that inspire generations, illuminate the truth, and testify to the eternal power of unwavering faith. Their examples call us to live boldly, trust deeply, and remain steadfast, knowing that God honors the faithful and that every act of obedience contributes to His eternal kingdom. Part 5. Judas Iscariot and Matthias, Betrayal and Restoration. No discussion of the 12 apostles would be complete without acknowledging Judas Iscariot, the man whose name has become synonymous with betrayal. Judas walked alongside Jesus, witnessed his miracles, and heard his teachings firsthand. Yet he chose a path of greed, deception, and ultimately betrayal, handing the Messiah over to be crucified. Tradition records that Judas's life ended in despair. He hanged himself, overwhelmed by guilt and regret. His story serves as a sobering reminder of the consequences of turning away from Christ and the devastating effects of unrepented sin. Judas's life and death teach us that knowing Jesus is not enough. Obedience, love, and surrender are essential. Even those closest to God can fall if the heart is not anchored in faith and humility, but in God's providence, restoration follows betrayal. After Judas's death, Matthias was chosen to replace him, completing the circle of the 12. Though not much is known of Matthias's life in detail, tradition suggests he was martyred, either by stoning or axe. Matthias's story represents God's faithfulness and provision. Even after failure and betrayal, God continues His work, filling gaps and raising up faithful servants to carry on the mission. The contrast between Judas and Matthias reminds us that while sin has consequences, God's grace provides restoration, opportunity, and renewed purpose for those who remain obedient and faithful. Judas and Matthias together highlight the themes of choice, consequence, and divine provision. Judas chose the path of self-interest and betrayal, leading to despair and death. Matthias embraced faithfulness, obedience, and courage, leaving a legacy of service and commitment. Their lives and deaths illustrate the importance of aligning our hearts with God's will, choosing obedience over convenience, faithfulness over fear, and trust over doubt. They remind us that God's kingdom is built not on human perfection, but on hearts surrendered to His plan. The lesson for us today is clear. The way we live matters. Our choices, our faithfulness, and our willingness to follow Jesus fully determine our spiritual legacy. Judas's story warns us of the dangers of compromise, greed, and deception, while Matthias's story encourages us to embrace God's calling, trust His plan, and live with courage and devotion. Both serve as powerful examples of the stakes involved in discipleship, the eternal consequences of our decisions, and the extraordinary rewards of faithfulness. Conclusion. The deaths of the 12 apostles are more than historical accounts. They are testimonies of faith, courage, and unwavering devotion to Jesus Christ. From Peter and Andrew, who faced crucifixion with humility and courage, to James the Greater and John, who exemplified boldness and perseverance, each apostle's end reflects a life surrendered fully to God. Philip, Bartholomew, and Thomas took the gospel to the ends of the earth, showing that faith often demands courage, sacrifice, and willingness to endure hardship. Matthew, James the Less, Thaddaeus, and Simon the Zealot remind us that ordinary men can live extraordinary lives through obedience and devotion. Judas Iscariot and Matthias teach us lessons about betrayal, consequences, and God's restorative power. Beloved, the lives and deaths of the apostles challenge us to examine our own faith. They inspire us to live boldly, to endure trials with courage, to serve faithfully even in obscurity, and to trust God's timing and provision. Following Jesus may require sacrifice, courage, and unwavering devotion, but the reward, eternal life, spiritual legacy, and the joy of serving God faithfully is far greater than anything this world can offer. May the examples of the 12 apostles encourage you to deepen your relationship with Jesus, live with unwavering faith, and embrace the call to discipleship fully. Stand firm in your faith, pursue obedience courageously, and trust in God's plan, knowing that every act of devotion contributes to His eternal kingdom. The apostles' sacrifices are a roadmap of faith, a mirror of courage, and a call to live with unwavering devotion, inspiring us to follow Christ no matter the cost.